You're a professor of entomology. What exactly is this, and why did you choose the bee?
Well, a professor of entomology is somebody who studies insects in general. But in fact, there are many millions of insects, so eventually you have to choose. And I chose bees for a number of reasons. One is that they're social, and so therefore it's very interesting to see how bee societies work. Secondly, I was interested in chemistry, and I wanted to understand how the bees communicated using chemical signals. And then finally, I've always been fascinated by keeping bees. And of course, bees have a very important role to play, both in producing food from crop plants through pollination, but also through producing their own products of honey, which I like very much. Okay. So those are some of the reasons.
So it was a perfect fit.
Yeah.
So are you a beekeeper? Do you keep bees?
I wouldn't really describe myself as a beekeeper. I do keep bees because we have to have colonies of bees to work on.
Of course.
And so I enjoy very much working on the bees and collecting the bees to do the experimental work that we do. But we actually don't keep the bees to produce honey. Honey for us is a byproduct of our experiment.
I'm sure some other beekeepers would definitely disagree with you on that. Yeah. Now, you're referring to a we, and I know that you've been, at Pretoria University, and there's a study group at Pretoria University that actually all focus on bees. So tell us a little bit about that and your career involved with, Pretoria University.
Well, I came to Pretoria University about just over 20 years ago. And we started up the bee research group there. Well, it's actually the social insects research group, because we work on bees and we work on ants and we work on wasps, but mostly bees. And so we started a research group, and the research group has been continuing ever since. And the research group is now headed up by Professor Christian Perk. So he and a number of other people are continuing the work on honeybees, and I'm associated with them from time to time because I can't give up my work on bees.
It's such a sticky business.
Yes,
it keeps you stuck. So tell me about your book. So in 2018, you decided to write a book, and I find the title very interesting, The Evolution of the Imperfect Honeybee, and you were very fortunate to write it with another Robin. So,
yes.
So tell us about the book.
Well, I've worked with Professor Robin Moritz for about 30 years, and the two of us have been working mostly on bees and mostly on the Cape honeybee. And one of the things that comes out of the work on the Cape honeybee is that the workers develop all sorts of interesting characteristics. They become social parasites and they operate on their own. So one of the things that the impressions that you get if you read this vast literature on bees, and if you Google it, you will get a few hundred or maybe a few thousand books on bees. So the question you have to ask yourself is, why another one? And the answer is that the underlying idea amongst most of the other books is that honeybees are this very well organized society, that they all work together, and it's a very harmonious society, and it's something that should be a good example for humans. We could emulate the bees and we'd be much happier. Well, I'm not sure that's true. But what we were interested in is whether this idea of the perfect honeybee is true. And the moment we started looking into it, we discovered it's actually not true. Because although the colony normally works as a well-organized whole, there are lots of situations in which it doesn't work like that, and that they're actually quite nasty as far as their interactions with other bees are concerned. So you get robbers, where they go and rob other colonies.
Oh, my word.
You get parasites, where parasitic bees, not other kinds of parasites. The parasitic bees come into the colony and start taking it over. So that's why we wrote the book about the dark side of the hive. And we also wanted to show that a lot of the attributes of bees are not perfect. They're simply the outcome of an evolutionary process which has taken whatever was available and actually made it work. And I think that's a much more interesting way of understanding the behavior of the bees than regarding them as this perfect, amazing organization, which is in fact too perfect. There's nothing perfect in the world. There are no perfect societies. They're societies that work reasonably well, and the bees are societies which work reasonably well. So that's the background to the book.
Now, but the byproduct is still pretty good in terms of the society.
I mean, the thing is this, that one of the reasons why commercial agriculture is so successful is that bee colonies are ideal for pollination because you have large numbers of individuals in each colony, between 20 and 50,000 individuals, and all those individuals are going out to pollinate. So you've got a very efficient workforce. And in fact, the honeybee is really the only species of bee which has these very large colonies that can be used in this way. So it's absolutely critical for our own well-being that there are bees around that can do this work for us. Yeah.
And I think when it comes to discussions on food security and the importance of pollination, protecting the bees is absolutely vital.
So the role that the honeybees play is absolutely vital, and they are also the only species of bee that does this. So in other words, humans are dependent on one other species, and that's the honeybee. So protecting the honeybee is absolutely crucial for our survival. Yeah.
Now, you're an honorary member of an organization called Apimondia.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about Apimondia, and what does Apimondia do for the bee worldwide?
Well, Apimondia is an international organization which was established to serve as an umbrella for all of the beekeeping organizations globally. So all countries are represented in Apimondia, and what is represented is the beekeeping organizations. So it's not individual membership, it's membership of these organizations. And so what you do then is you get an organization that can represent the interests of all the organized beekeepers in the world. And it also has members that are associated with the industry. So members who make equipment for beekeeping, members who are involved in the packaging and distribution of the products of beekeeping and so on. So it really is a global organization, and it tries to represent globally what is important for the beekeeping industry. And one of the things that they've been particularly concerned about is establishing global standards for the quality of bee products. And that really is one of their most important functions, and the function that's probably most important for the discussion that we're having. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, you were involved with a working group on honey fraud within Apimondia, and so what is their position statement regarding, honey fraud? Is this really an international concern?
It really is an international concern. I mean, I think that the statement on honey fraud is trying to define fairly precisely what is honey, so that you can distinguish it from various other kinds of products which are not honey. So that's the first aspect of it. The second aspect of it is to establish standards for the honey, because obviously being a natural product, it varies a little bit depending on where it comes from. So those are the two key elements of what the working group is doing. The third element is to try and identify the nature of the ways in which the product is manipulated so that so that fraudulent products are produced.
And what are some of these ways? I mean, how creative have people been?
Well, people are extraordinarily creative, actually. I mean, one of the obvious ways of doing it is to take various sugar syrups and use those sugar syrups and then pass them off as honey. But in addition to that, what is concerning a number of the organizations in Apimondia is not just fraud, but honey laundering. And what I mean by honey laundering is buying low-grade honey from particular countries in bulk, importing them into a second country, and then selling that as though it was produced in that second country. And so that's what's known as honey laundering. So you launder honey from one country and pass it off as honey from another country because the price is higher. And so I think there are a whole set of aspects which are involved in trying to define the origins of the honey and the origins of the plants from which the honey comes from, so that those qualities can be defined, and that then determines the quality of the honey and also secondarily the price of the honey. Yeah.
Now, as I understand it, Apimondia is not a regulatory organization.
No.
So how does it interact with governments who ultimately would set standards, such as within South Africa, the Department of Agriculture?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Apimondia's role is simply to lobby various governments and offer them advice about what sort of regulations would be appropriate to protect the honey industry. And they have very strong relationships with the regulatory authorities, for instance, in the European Union, and they have strong relationships with the FAO, which is the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. So I think it's by developing those relationships and having a lobbying role that they can begin to get changes that take place.
So in your view, do you think that the South African regulatory framework needs to change?
I think that it does. I think that part of the problem is that the methods for the analysis of honey have changed radically over the last 2 decades. And that the methods that were used previously to specify honey standards are becoming outdated. And that what needs to happen is that there needs to be a re-look at the honey standards and to see whether they are still applicable. But more importantly, there needs to be a re-look at the analytical techniques that you have to actually determine whether the honey is what it says it is. And I mean, some of the new techniques have been involved with DNA technology, which allows you to identify which bee produced the honey, which also allows you to identify which plants the honey came from. So there's a degree of precision about being able to define the honeys which was simply not available in the past. So I think that's the direction in which we need to look.
And that just allows us a far more authenticity. If it says that it's really lychee honey, we are able to precisely determine that it is lychee honey.
Well, we can determine how much lychee there is actually there, and whether that lychee nectar was actually collected by the honeybee or not. And so I think that what we're trying to do is use the analytical techniques to reduce the area in which people can manipulate the honey, so that when they claim something, the claim can either be verified or not. Yeah.
One last question. we have this newly established African Regional Committee on Honey Standards.
Yes.
So, I mean, obviously we would like to have within the trade region, opportunities to trade. But what does this mean when it comes to honey standards? Because I assume that we do not have the same honey standards just within SADC.
I think that there isn't a general agreement about honey standards in the SADC region, and I think that's what we need. The honey standards were largely established in relation to honey produced in Europe. And the question that's been asked is whether the same honey standards are applicable to honey which is produced in the SADC region. And so we need to have an agreement within the region about what are appropriate honey standards for the region, and then hold the producers of the honey to those standards. That's the one aspect of it. There's a secondary aspect of it, and that is that there is some honey produced in some of the countries to the north of South Africa, which come from stingless bees. And that honey is very different from honeybee honey. And so what you need is you need standards for honeybee honey, and you need standards for stingless bee honey. And why that's important is because the price, which is associated with being able to have authentic stingless bee honey or authentic honeybee honey is very important for establishing the price. Because I think we are not into the production of bulk honey in the same way that, say, China and Mexico are. What we're in the business of is producing niche honeys, rather like Manuka honey, which has a particular value for a particular market, and that's what we need to try and establish
and preserve.
And preserve, yeah.
So it is quite a sticky mess, and
it's a very sticky mess. Yeah.
And good that we're having a whole day just talking about how are we going to navigate our way through this.
And in fact, in our book, we talk about the fact that the diet of honeybees is rather difficult, because on the one hand they collect dust, which is pollen, and so you have to manipulate dust. And secondly, they produce honey, which is this incredibly sticky product. So the question is, how do they actually manage it within their hive and not get into serious trouble by feeding on sticky glue and dust? But they do it very effectively.
Very effectively. Well, thank you so much, Professor Crewe. It's been great chatting to you, and we look forward to hearing more about how these standards are actually improving so that we can protect what we are actually doing.
Thank you very much. Yeah.